We said that the key to understanding the secret properties of man and how it is possible that everybody could get the same amount of man and that would satisfy them, we have to look at Yom Kippur, right? That's what we said. That's where the discussion is. In an unlikely place, in the laws of Yom Kippur, because there's an association between Inoi, which is the affliction of Yom Kippur, the reason we don't eat or drink, and the man, which is described as a food that vaya'ancha, it afflicts a person, and we discussed yesterday why. So what about Yom Kippur is associated with the man? Okay, so this is just a slight, it's not very tricky, but just a little bit tricky. And that is, in Jewish law, you always have to distinguish between what is forbidden and what makes you liable. You need to understand the difference. So there are certain behaviors that the Torah says are forbidden. And then there are other behaviors that the Torah says not only is it forbidden, but you are liable for some kind of a punishment. So on Yom Kippur, it's forbidden to eat, right? Question is, what constitutes eating? At which point have you had enough that we can say you are eating? Okay, how much? So what's the amount that's considered eating? A kazayas. The volume of an olive. Bearing in mind that it seems the olives they had in Israel in those days were larger than our olives. But that's how we determine the amount. So if you eat less than a kazayas, technically it's not even considered eating. That's why people under certain circumstances on Yom Kippur are advised to eat small amounts spread out over a period of time, because technically that's not considered breaking the fast. If a person has, for example, a certain medical need or whatever, they would eat in that manner. This is not a halacha shir, so if a person has a medical condition, you have to consult with a person who's competent, who understands both the halacha and the medical. But if a person eats that amount, a kazayas, they are not yet liable for punishment. They've done an avera, they have sinned, they have to do teshuvah, but you have to eat more than that in order to be liable for punishment. So how much you have to eat in order to be liable for punishment? That the Gemara identifies is called a koseves. So koseves is some kind of you take dates and you kind of press them together to make some kind of little date cake, and that is the amount for which a person would be liable. The punishment for eating on Yom Kippur is what we call kores, that there's some kind of effect on the neshama, that the neshama is excised, it's kind of disconnected from Hashem. So in order to be liable for that, you have to eat this koseves. What exactly a koseves translates into in modern terms is subject to some degree of debate, but in biblical measures, it's considered the equivalent of double egg volumes. In other words, very often you hear kibetza, which is one egg volume, and this is like double that. Okay, the technicality is not what's interesting for us. What's interesting for us is what the Gemara then continues. So the Gemara asks, we get it. The whole thing is, the Torah tells you have to afflict yourself on Yom Kippur. Afflict yourself means that you cannot feel the satisfaction of a full stomach. That's why there's a minimum. You've got to eat a certain amount, and then you start to feel satisfied. And that minimum amount is this koseves. So the Gemara asks, are you telling me that on the one hand you could have oig melech habashan? Remember oig, he pops up in various places in the Torah. He is the prototype, he's the avatar for a huge human being. It's called a giant. So you're telling me that the same amount of food is going to satiate Oig, Melech Habasha, the greatest, largest human we have on record. So if there was ever a biblical book of world records, he'd be in as the biggest man. And some ordinary or perhaps even small framed person. You're telling me that they could be satisfied with the same amount of food? The Gemara gives a very strange answer. It says, yes, of course. It's just that an ordinary person will be fully satiated, and oig will be partially satiated, which doesn't really seem to answer the question. What does it mean? You can't be half pregnant, so can you be half satiated? What exactly is the Gemara trying to say? And actually, if you think about it logically, it really makes no sense, because if a koseves is enough food to satisfy a massive person like oig, then surely it's much more than the rest of us need. And on the other hand, if just a koseves could satisfy ordinary people, how could it possibly ever satisfy oig? Doesn't match. Doesn't seem to work. So, unless, of course, we're using a formula, which is not the formula that you expect. Because straight away, as soon as you start to think about being satiated, being satisfied, that what do you think? You think about, I was hungry, and now I don't feel hungry anymore. That's usually how we'd measure that, right? So at the end of a meal, when you bench and you say, v'ochalta v'savata, that you have eaten and you are satiated, or ve'rachta es Hashem, and you eat and you bless Hashem, well, very often we feel, I'm not just satiated, I'm stuffed. I ate more than I was supposed to. So we typically associate this idea of being satiated with hunger. So how am I now relative to hunger? That's not the formula that the Gemara is using. So once we unpack what the formula is that the Gemara is using, then we'll be able to understand how there's a standardized amount of food for which a person is liable on Yom Kippur, from which we can understand that there's a standardized portion of food that satiated people in the desert. So what we've got to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to feel satisfied after you've eaten? And so what we're going to discover is this. Everybody will acknowledge that you have to eat in order to live. Is that fair? You have to eat in order to live.
Not the other way around.
Exactly, not the other way around. This is true. The question is, what does that mean, eat in order to live? So we understand that there's a concept, the way Hashem has designed the body is that you've got to put nutrition into the body in order to keep the body alive. But what does it mean to keep the body alive? That's the question. So let's think about it. What makes humans live? Now we're looking through the lens of Torah, obviously. So what makes a human being live? Or, to put it differently, under what circumstances is a human being alive? And under what circumstances would, God forbid, a human being no longer be alive? The soul. That's the answer that everybody's going to give you. You have to keep the soul in the body for the person to be alive. Right? Fair enough? The soul's got to be in the body to keep the body alive. Now, the question is this. If the soul is in the body, is that measured or experienced differently in different parts of the body? In other words, if a soul is inside a body, is the soul more in the brain than it is in your finger? Or to put that differently, the fact that the soul is in the body is the reason that the body is alive. So is the brain more, less, or as alive as the finger? Interesting question. Interesting question, right?
In a way.
Right? So what would you say? You say it's the same?
Well, because every single cell in the body kind of has its own life force and brain
Correct.
and nucleus and all
Exactly.
of that. So if something starts to rot, let's say, throughout the body, eventually that'll go to the brain. But if the brain's dead, nothing else functions.
Okay, so what you've just said is there's a difference.
There is a difference,
Right.
but on some level they're both quite important.
Okay.
Your heart function is also so.
Okay, good.
All of these
So is
things,
this a question of
carbon,
how
hydrogen,
important it is?
oxygen, nitrogen. I suppose in a way it is, because the soul is sustaining the body, but then the
Right.
body then has to be sustained and feed back as well. It's a
Okay.
feedback
So a
loop.
simple question. Yeah?
Medically, what happens is if they suspect that you died, that the first thing they check is your pulse.
Yes.
So is then not your heart.
Okay, so does that illustrate that your heart contains your neshama more?
Because no, I understand what
Big
you're
medical
saying,
controversy.
and it's very confusing.
Big
because I was
medical
gonna tell you
controversy.
before you said that your brain will tell you that you've got a pain in your fingers.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So that's firstly. Secondly, I disagree with you because they check if you're brain dead with those things.
It's a loop, but the thing is, science kind of knows a bit
I mean,
more
that
about
I
the
can
body.
write
It
this
knows
tomorrow
zero
and know what
about
he's
About the soul.
So
Okay, so let's without overcomplicating this, but we are going to come back to these points. So without overcomplicating it, is the brain more alive than the finger?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because everything is controlled by the brain.
Ah, good. So in other words, the brain is the command center of the
Right.
entire body, and the brain distributes the life force that the neshama puts into the body, distributes it to the rest of the body, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Let me rephrase the question differently and see if you think differently.
Would it be the same if someone was, say, in a coma or something like that?
Well,
With
it's
very
still-
little brain
That's the
activity,
next question.
Conscious brain activity.
That's true,
Brilliant question.
but at the end of the day, even if a person is not conscious, the brain has to operate enough
Yeah.
to keep the person alive, because if that were no longer the case,
Tell
they
the
would no
heart to
longer
beat,
be
tell the
alive.
blood to turn.
So, if you had to say on life support, that's a different question, because maybe now there's a function of life that is being performed by machines. Okay, different question. But so let's look at it from a somewhat different angle. Okay, would you agree with this? A person is either alive or they are not.
Yes.
Is that a fair thing to say? Person is either alive or they are not. Okay? So
We're talking artificial.
no, I'm just talking the state, the definition of a person.
Yeah.
Either you're defining a person as alive or you're defining a person as dead. So even if you've got issues of end of life questions and turning off machines, etc., still, at the end of the day, we will only issue a death certificate when the person is not alive. So the implication is that either you're alive or you're not alive. Okay. Now,
Actually, Pinto would say unalive. And
Unalive.
Unalive.
right? Okay. So now the question is this: if a person's brain is alive, would you agree that the opposite of that would be that the brain is not alive? I'm saying as a piece of the body. In other words, in the same way as you said, either the person's alive or they're not alive. So now let's break it down into components. The brain, either the brain is alive or the brain is not alive. Is that fair?
Yes.
The finger, either the finger is alive or it's not alive. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, so essentially what we're saying then is that the idea of being alive is an equal experience no matter which part of the body it is. If I'm looking at putting the soul in or keeping the soul in the body, then it actually makes no difference which part of the body I'm talking about. Either the soul is in the body and the body is alive, or the soul has left the body and the body is no longer alive. Now, of course, we know that it's possible for cells within a part of the body to die. Same principle. Either it's alive or it's not alive. So, if God forbid a person has a segment of the body that has become gangrenous or whatever the case and is no longer alive, so how we treat it is we'll have to, so that, if it's really irreversible, then we're going to have to remove that part of the body for the benefit of the rest of the body. But the fact is, either it is or it isn't alive. Meaning, being alive is an on-off, binary, black or white reality. There is no maybe. There is no gray. Let's use a different example. Let's say that you have a person who is robust and athletic and healthy and discovery vitality, double platinum, ruby, gold, whatever, They're just amazing. And sitting right next to them is a person who is decrepit and frail and teetering on the edge. Is it correct? I know we use the expression, but is it correct to say that this person is more alive than that person? We'll use that expression because what we want to say is that that person is more vibrant, more dynamic, more capable, etc. But on a technical level, is the one person more alive than the other person? Is that a fair thing to say? If life is defined as the soul is in the body, and death is defined as the soul is no longer in the body. So, is there really a difference between the person who's athletic and the person who is frail on that scale, alive versus not alive? There actually isn't a difference. Quality of life, massive difference.
Not the question.
That's not the question. The question is, alive or not alive?
To be or not.
Exactly, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if I frame the question differently, if I approach this discussion differently, I will have a completely different answer. If I call life performing the function you were designed for, as opposed to living or not living. You hear the difference now? If I'm defining life as successfully performing the purpose for which you were designed, then is the brain alive in the same way as the finger is alive? No. Because the function of the brain is so sophisticated and so complex, and in order to perform that function, it needs such a high level, sophisticated type of life. That's why, God forbid, if the person is in a coma and that brain is not getting the life force that it needs, and therefore the brain is not able to function in the way that it should, then we have a serious problem. Whereas a finger needs far more basic, lower grade life in order to be a finger. So if I'm looking at function, if I'm looking at purpose, if I'm looking at complexity, if I'm looking at sophistication, then yes, there are different kinds of life. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And by the same token, there will be different kinds of life between people. So the athletic, vibrant person who's in their prime, they will have a much more robust version of life. And the person who is teetering on the edge and lying in an ICU bed will have a much lower quality of life. So it depends what the conversation is. If the conversation is alive versus not alive, that is a binary state. Either you're alive or not, God forbid. But if I'm talking about purpose, functionality, levels, etc., vitality, well then there is a whole broad range of what life looks like. Yeah.
And then, Rob, it's obviously different if you're looking at it from philosophical or spiritual.
Correct, but right now we're just looking biological. Okay? But that's valid. So now, do we eat to live or do we eat to optimize? Very different, right? Yeah. And I'm not talking about whether we eat to indulge. That's another whole question. Let's not go there. If a person lives what we call today eats a balanced diet, has a healthy nutritional program, what is the program intended to do? Keep you alive or optimize your function? Optimize, right? The goal of a nutrition plan is to optimize your function, your health, your longevity. That's what it's for. Keep you alive, we could do with very basic input. So we can make that distinction. So if a person has a proper nutritional plan, that will address what kind of balance do you have between your carbs and your fats and your proteins. It's going to ensure that you're getting all the right nutrients in the food that you're eating. So you want to have your leafy greens, and you want to make sure that your potassium level is healthy, and that your sodium intake isn't too high, and you want to make sure that you're getting in the right vitamins and that you have right? That's going to be a nutritional plan, because we want to make sure that your brain health is maximum. So eat your omega-3s, right? So that your brain function is ideal. And we want to make sure that your whole immunity is where it should be. So make sure that you've got the right things that make you immuno resilient, etc. That's a luxury. At the end of the day, if you pulled a malnourished person out of a concentration camp, the first thing that you needed to do was make sure that they can survive till tomorrow. And then you could build their nutritional plan over time. That tells you that when it comes to eating, which is designed to help keep the soul in the body, there are two completely different kinds of eating. There's the kind of eating that just keeps you alive, and there's the kind of eating that keeps you optimal. If I'm looking at the eating that keeps you optimal, no two people can ever have the same diet. We have to understand your metabolism, your genetic makeup. And then, to the best of our ability, we can craft a nutritional plan that works for you, that will not be the same nutritional plan for your spouse living in the same house as you. which is going to be a bit of a nightmare for her because now she's producing 2 types of menu every single night. And then, of course, if the children are still home, it gets really complicated. But what we'd be looking to do then is we'd be looking to ensure that every element of the system is working as well as it should. But on a day like Yom Kippur, where, let's be honest, you ask the average Jewish person at some point during the course of Yom Kippur, and they are pretty convinced that that's it. If this fast does not end soon, I don't know if I'm going to be around. So the inoi, that sense of affliction, is not because I'm not getting the whole fancy, bespoke nutritional program that I need. It's just like I feel like I might not make it. So when you're looking to mitigate inoi, that sense of affliction, that feeling that I'm going to collapse, there's just a standardized version of food that will give you relief from that. That's what this koiseves is. It's an amount of food that give it to any person, regardless of their body mass, of their body composition. Doesn't matter who they are. Give them this food and they'll feel the crisis is averted. The crisis is averted. That's what we're calling satiated. But your meal plan that's going to give you satisfaction, that's something completely different, and nobody can mandate for one person that it should be the same as another person. That brings us back to the man. But before we get back to the man, there's one more detail to this. Because we've said that food is there in order to keep the soul in the body. That's why Hashem designed that we have to eat, to keep our neshama in our body. But the neshama also has 2 dimensions to it. I mean, it obviously has many dimensions, but for the purpose of this conversation, it has many dimensions. There is the soul as a life force. There is my soul that gives me my unique character and abilities. Question is, which is the deeper part of the soul? The part of the soul that keeps me alive? Or the part of the soul that gives me my unique character? Logic is going to tell you it must be the unique soul, because the basic soul sounds like a battery pack. And a battery pack doesn't sound like it's particularly advanced or sophisticated. It's just you put it in and the little bunny starts going. Whereas the sophisticated, specific element that makes me, why I'm different to all the other 8 billion people on the planet, that sounds more sophisticated, more advanced, sounds like a higher level neshama. But it's not as simple as that. Because there's another way to frame this. And the other way to frame this is that there's a part of our soul that is the essence of who we are. And then there's the part of the soul that is the detail of who we are. The detail will change consistently through our lives. The essence will always be the same. So the essence of the soul is actually deeper. The kind of meal plan that I have, that's going to change through the course of my life, not just from one person to the next. Because at different phases, maybe there's different foodstuffs that I need or that I should avoid. That speaks to the part of me that links my bespoke, my personal neshama, my ever-changing neshama, the part of myself that grows and that sometimes is challenged, and so on and so forth. Whereas the one-size-fits-all portion of food speaks to the essence of my neshama. In the same way as this portion is always standard, this part of my soul, the essence of my soul, is always the same. Man was food for the essence of the soul. Therefore, one oimer, one portion of man, is good enough for any human being. Because this is not food to help develop your individualized character. This is food to put you in touch with the essence of who you are. And therefore, it's one portion across the board. Because the essence is unchanging. In a different kind of a savata, right? Exactly. Then we'll have to work out why man, if it is this single portion, why right at the end of the story does the Torah then tell us, yes, but it's a fraction of another portion? Because surely that undermines all of this.
Doesn't make sense.